there, I'm Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. Today I want to share with you all about the upcoming SPC Fest this September 13th and 14th. So make sure and block your calendars now. During this event, you'll have 2 full days to enjoy a variety of card making and scrapbooking classes that are packed with loads of tips and tricks and techniques. Whether you're a card maker or a scrapbooker, or you've got a simple, clean and simple style, or more mixed media style, there is something for everyone, and you never know where you might learn something new. Make sure you visit scrapbook.com to get all the details. If you can't watch and participate during the event, you can always catch the replay. All of the classes will be available for replay on scrapbook.com's YouTube channel. For my class, I'm going to be sharing some mixed media techniques using distress inks, distress watercolor pencils, embossing glaze, and combining all of those with some of my favorite stamps, dies, and stencils. In this video, I'm going to be going over the supplies that I'll be using for my class, and then sharing just a small amount of basic homework that you can do to get a small jump start on my class. I also recommend checking out my supply list, which you can find in the description box below. If you click on the word more, it will open up the text box and you can scroll and see the entire list of the supplies that I'll be using. Before I continue, I want to stress that you do not have to have the same exact supplies that I'm using for my class. Feel free to pull from your stash similar supplies. So if you have different colors, different types of inks even, different stamps, stencils, and dies, feel free to pull from your stash and use what you have. If, however, you are in the mood to do a little shopping, I would super appreciate if you would click on my links and shop through those. When you do that, it supports me, and I really would appreciate that so much. Now let's get into it. The main supplies I'll be using to create my card for this class is the Tim Holtz Vault Scribbly Butterfly die set, but you can use any type of die you like. If you're not into butterflies, you could pick something else. I'm going to be using this label stencil by Tim Holtz. You can use any stencil you like. I just recommend one that has larger openings like this one because of the technique that we're going to be doing during the class. And the stamp sets I'm going to be working with is this Happy Birthday stamp set from scrapbook.com. I'll be using this for my sentiment. Feel free to use any sentiment that you like. If you don't want to use a stamp, you could also use a die cut or a pre-printed sentiment as well. The other stamp set I'm going to be working with is this Papillion stamp set from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. I'm going to be using this image as a background stamp and this image to add another layer of detail and technique to the card. Feel free to use any sort of background stamp you might have and any sort of image type stamp that you have as well. As for the inks, I'm going to be working with Distress Oxide and Villainous Potion. You could also use regular dye ink or pigment ink or distress ink instead of Distress Oxide ink. The other ink I'm going to be using is Archival ink, which is a permanent waterproof ink. The color I'm working with is Beach Cruiser. You can swap this out for any other type of ink if you like. It will just give you a slightly different effect. Because this is permanent, it won't bleed when we add the other mediums and techniques that we'll be doing. But you can certainly use other inks. It just will give you a slightly different look. We're also going to be doing some heat embossing, and for that you're going to need some sort of embossing ink. I'll be using Versamark, and the embossing we'll be doing with liquid platinum embossing powder, which is just regular embossing powder. This is just a light gold color. Again, feel free to use any color you like. The embossing glaze I'm going to be working with is Seedless Preserves and Villainous Potion. And then last but not least, I'm going to be using some Distress watercolor pencils, and the colors I'm going to be using are Villainous Potion, Seedless Preserves, Uncharted Mariner, and Salvaged Patina. And these are found in the Distress watercolor sets 1, 2, and 5. And as for the colors, feel free to switch out and use different colors for any of these mediums if you like. The papers I'm going to be working with for this class is a piece of vellum, a piece of watercolor paper, and then a piece of smooth white cardstock. As for some of the basic tools I'll be working with, I recommend some sort of a craft mat just to protect your work surface. We're going to be doing some die cutting, so you're going to need a die cutting machine, and then I find a craft die cutting pick and a die cutting brush to come in handy when working with dies. You also need a pair of scissors. I've got a distress sprayer, so any kind of water bottle filled with water will work. I'm going to be working with a water brush. You could use a paintbrush and water. I need a blending brush of some sort. And I'm also going to be working on the Altenew Stamp Wheel Ultra Sticky Mat to do some stencil work. This will just help hold my paper and stencil in place so they don't slide around. This is stored in a Totally Tiffany 8x8 pocket. I've just included the packaging and then a piece of sticker paper, and that just helps me store and keep my mat clean. If you don't have this particular sticky mat, any kind of sticky mat would work. You could also use some low tack tape or washi tape or mint tape to kind of help hold the paper and stencil in place while we're doing the stencil work as well. I'm also going to be working with a stamping platform. If you don't have a stamping platform, you can certainly use a clear stamping block to do the stamping. I also recommend having a piece of computer paper folded in half. That will come in handy when cleaning up the embossing powder, and then a paper towel or two. Because we're going to be doing some drying and heat embossing, I recommend having a heat gun of some sort and a heat embossing tool. And then as far as the adhesives, I'm going to be using a temporary adhesive to help hold my paper in place during one of the stamping techniques. And I'm going to be working with a liquid adhesive. This is just the Precision Glue Press and some 1mm foam adhesive, which just adds a little bit of dimension, but you can use any adhesives you like for assembling the card. Now for my class, there is also just a small amount of homework that you can do ahead of time to just help get yourself prepared and ready for class. One of those being gathering all of your supplies and having them put together and ready to go for class. But I also recommend going ahead and cutting up some panels for the card itself. So this is the Distress watercolor paper, so any sort of watercolor paper, and I've cut this down to 4 by 5¼ inches, and that is the paper we'll be working on to create the background, and then I'll be layering that onto a piece of just white cardstock that is 4¼ by 5½ inches. So you could go ahead and cut some panels, these sizes, for these two papers, just to have ready to go for your class. So the other thing you can go ahead and do ahead of time for the class is to do the die cutting. And for that, again, I'm using the Vault Scribbly Butterfly die set, but you could use any die set you like. And I'm going to be cutting the main butterfly from white cardstock and then the shadow layer from the vellum. And I'm using vellum so that the embellishment we create with the die cut doesn't cover up the background that we'll be creating in the class. For those of you where die cutting might be something new that you've not done, I thought I would share some tips and tricks working with dies, especially ones that are really detailed like this butterfly. Before I do die cut, a lot of times I like to just trim around my die cut shape and just trim it down a little smaller so that it will fit onto my die cutting platform. And for this die, with it being so detailed, I find that I get the best cutting results if I switch out one of the cutting plates and use the Chrome Precision base plate. And then I can just place my die here on the paper on top of that plate, then place the other cutting plate on top of it, and then run it through my die cutting machine. And if you do get any cracking or popping type noises, that is completely normal. And it's not damaging or hurting anything when you do hear that. So then you can just pop out that die super easy. Now, as you can see, that paper is still kind of stuck in there. So a lot of times I like to use a little craft or a die pick, and you can kind of then pop that loose and get it out. And if it's still stuck in there, and just kind of work your way around. A lot of dies will have little holes on the front of them, and that's just so that you can push that pick in there and kind of help pop that paper out of the die so that you don't tear it as you're trying to remove it. And then as for all these other little pieces, you can use your pick to pop those out as well. Another trick that I find kind of handy is to take this little tool here and rub it over the area, and that will kind of loosen up some more of those pieces a little faster. And I'm just working over a lid from a scrapbook.com storage bin, but their stack and sort trays are the same size and are just a great way to kind of help keep the mess contained. And then you can just pop out all the other little pieces that maybe don't come out when you rub over it with the brush. And then your die cut's ready to go. And then you can just dump this into the trash. So now I'm going to cut that shadow layer, and for this I'm using vellum. And again, I'm just going to use my scissors and trim around this piece and trim off some of that excess paper. And for this, I don't recommend using the precision plate for large, solid, open dies like this because it adds so much pressure. It can warp these. So I would definitely recommend switching that out and going back to your regular cutting plate that comes with your machine. However, if you're looking to minimize warping, I highly recommend the scrapbook.com Magic Mat. It is a self-healing cutting mat, and if it does get a little bit warped, you can heat it and it will go back flat again. And so anyway, I find it just really handy for doing die cutting, especially with just regular die cuts and thinner paper. So I'm gonna just run that through. And there is the shadow layers. So then these are the pieces that you'll have ready to go for class. If you want to make a couple extras while you're at it, you certainly could, and then just have them on hand to either practice the techniques or to make more than one card. So for your homework then, you've cut out your butterfly layers or whatever die cuts that you'd like to use to embellish your card, and you've cut a piece of watercolor paper down, and then you have a piece of smooth cardstock. So you want to put these together along with the rest of your supplies. And one of the things that I recommend is this super handy zipper pouch from scrapbook.com. And then you can gather together all of the supplies that you need for your class and then just put them in the bag, and then everything's kept together and ready to go for class. And then you could then even put like a little sticky note or something on the outside of the bag to remind you that this is for Juliana's class or for whoever's class that you're preparing for, and it would just have everything together for you and ready to go when class goes live. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.